Idea, product, execution, team, and luck.
Right. The equation.
Yeah, that is the mathematical equation for building a startup empire. And it is entirely multiplication.
Which is brutal.
It is. If any one of those first four variables is a zero, the entire outcome is zero. But here is the truly terrifying part of that formula.
The final variable.
Exactly. Luck. It's a random multiplier anywhere between 0 and like 10,000.
Yeah.
You can have a flawlessly timed idea, a visionary product, relentless execution, and a genius team.
Yeah.
But if your luck multiplier is 0,
You fail.
You fail.
Yeah.
But conversely, if your luck multiplier hits 10,000, you alter the trajectory of human history.
It is the absolute definition of chaotic architecture. We
Right.
we like to believe that success in the global economy is linear.
Right, like a straight line.
Exactly. We want to believe that if you put in the hours and acquire the skills, the result is a guaranteed proportional output. But the hyper-growth startup ecosystem completely obliterates that comfort.
When you look at the mechanics of extreme wealth and global influence, you are looking at a system dominated by just uncontrollable variance.
So if you're listening to this, you are about to hear the unvarnished mechanics of how modern empires are actually built. We are completely stripping away the Hollywood mythos today.
No cinematic dorm room coding montages.
Exactly. I want you to forget the endless partying in those startup movies and the slick narrative of the overnight billionaire. We are diving into the dark, grinding, often agonizing reality of starting a hypergrowth company.
Yeah, the real mechanics.
We are using the source material of Sam Altman and Dustin Moskovitz, who are two of the primary architects of this exact ecosystem, by the way, to extract the absolute unromanticized truths about what it actually requires to birth a monopoly.
And look, this is not a motivational seminar.
No, definitely not.
Think of this deep dive as an autopsy of high-stakes capitalism. Startups are no longer just, niche technology experiments. They're the primary vehicles shaping our global future.
They dictate everything now.
They do. Our geopolitical communication infrastructure, the nature of modern work, the massive reallocation of global wealth. Yet the machinery behind them is fiercely misunderstood by the general public.
Which is why our mission today is to dissect that machinery piece by piece. So if you are listening to this right now, whether you are an aspiring founder, an institutional investor allocating capital, or just someone trying to understand the economic forces shaping your world, brace yourself.
Because the first thing we have to dismantle is the delusion of the startup itself.
Right. We have to look at the psychological trap of entrepreneurship. Dustin Moskovitz lays out 4 common yet entirely false reasons people start companies.
What is so crucial about Moskowitz's analysis here is how systematically he dismantles the cultural narrative we've been fed over the last 2 decades.
The glamorous founder narrative.
Exactly. He identifies the 4 false motivations: doing it for the glamour, doing it to be the boss, doing it for schedule flexibility, and doing it for guaranteed wealth.
Let's look closely at the delusion of being the boss. Because that's the ultimate corporate fantasy, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
The idea that you are finally off the leash, making the rules, answering to no one but your own genius.
But it is a complete inversion of reality.
It really is. It reminds me of like a highly leveraged hostage situation where the hostage taker is your own vision.
That's a great way to put it. You don't dictate terms to the market. The survival of the entity dictates terms to you.
Let's break down the mechanics of this. You aren't sitting in a corner office pondering strategy and isolated brilliance. You are suddenly reporting to absolutely everyone.
Precisely. You report to your employees who depend on you for their livelihood, their healthcare, their career trajectory.
Right.
You report to your board of directors and your investors who demand an exponential return on the capital they entrusted to you. And they can often legally fire you from the company you created.
Which happens a lot.
It does. And most ruthlessly, you report to your customers who possess zero loyalty and will abandon you the exact second your product fails to solve their problem. You are at the dead center of a web of immense, unrelenting obligations.
And if the psychological weight of that web isn't enough, we have to look at the physical reality. The financial press romanticizes the grind and the
Hustle culture.
Right, but the biological toll is devastating.
Yeah.
The Economist ran a fascinating, sobering piece about Entrepreneurs Anonymous, highlighting the very real, very prevalent phenomenon of founder depression.
It's incredibly common.
And Moskovitz himself admits that during the early explosive growth years of Facebook, he was completely unhealthy. He wasn't exercising, he was crippled by anxiety, and he threw out his back every 6 months.
Let's pause on that fact for a second. He was throwing his back out every 6 months at 21 years old.
Yeah, that isn't a sports injury.
No, that is the psychological weight of an enterprise literally crushing a human being's physical nervous system. The stress manifests physiologically because founders live in a state of perpetual cognitive dissonance.
Okay, wait. Explain the mechanics of that cognitive dissonance. Why does it physically break you?
Because of the massive gap between what you must project and what you actually know.
Ah, I see.
As a founder, you have to stand up in front of your engineering team on a Monday morning and project absolute, unshakable confidence in the company's inevitable global dominance.
Even if things are falling apart.
Exactly. Privately, you know that the servers are failing. A major competitor is launching a clone of your product tomorrow in your financial runway.
Meaning the cash you have left before you literally cannot make payroll.
Right. The runway ends in 6 weeks. Holding those two conflicting realities in your mind simultaneously, week after week, it triggers a chronic cortisol response.
Your body is basically in a perpetual fight or flight state.
Yes. But there is no predator to outrun. There's only a spreadsheet and a server architecture.
And that ties directly into the burden of responsibility. I mean, it's one thing to risk your own savings in your own career. But as a founder, you are asking elite talent to follow you.
You are.
These people are dedicating the prime, most energetic years of their lives to your vision. You are fundamentally responsible for the opportunity cost of their time.
Which is huge.
Right. If the company fails, you haven't just lost a business. You have squandered a collective decade of human potential that your team could have spent elsewhere.
That is an agonizing, terrifying obligation. If you're considering this path, you have to ask yourself a very practical question.
Which is?
Are you prepared to be violently woken up at 3 a.m. on a Sunday to fix a database failure?
Yeah.
And crucially, you aren't doing it out of a romantic passion for coding in the dark. You are doing it because if the service stays down, the company loses revenue, the runway shortens, and you are actively failing the families of the people who trusted your leadership.
Wow. Which perfectly contextualizes why Moskovitz cites Ben Horowitz's famous rule. He says, the #1 rule of a CEO is managing your own psychology.
Yes.
When you first hear that, it sounds like a soft, human resources style platitude. But in the context of high-stakes capitalism, it is actually the hardest technical requirement of the job.
It really is the ultimate bottleneck of a company's growth. If the CEO's psychology fractures, the company fractures.
They mirror each other.
Exactly. You have to actively engineer your own mental resilience. You have to find a way to absorb the existential terror of potential bankruptcy without transmitting that panic to your team.
While simultaneously not deluding yourself about the harsh realities of your metrics.
Right. It requires an almost sociopathic level of emotional compartmentalization, coupled with deep, genuine empathy for your users and employees. It is a nearly impossible psychological tightrope.
So if we look at the reality, if the glamour is fabricated, if you aren't truly the boss, if you have zero schedule flexibility, and if the stress might literally hospitalize you.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
It does. Logic dictates that almost no rational human being should ever start a company. So what is the psychological profile of the person who actually survives this? What is the only valid reason to endure this crucible?
Well, according to both Altman and Moskovitz, the only acceptable reason is a double negative.
Yeah.
You can't not do it.
You can't not do it.
Right. The passion for solving a specific, glaring problem must come first, and the creation of the corporate entity comes second. You must be compelled by an inefficiency in the world that offends you so deeply that you have no choice but to fix it.
I love the visceral way Moskovitz describes the genesis of Asana. And for context for you listening, Asana is a massive B2B SaaS company, meaning business-to-business software as a service.
Right.
They build the digital infrastructure and project management tools that other global corporations use to coordinate their workforces. It is highly complex, unglamorous, critical infrastructure.
Very unglamorous.
Moskovitz didn't sit down and say, I want to be a CEO, let's brainstorm a B2B SaaS product. He said the idea for Asana was beating itself out of our chest.
I love that quote.
They experienced the profound dysfunction of coordinating engineering teams at Facebook. They saw that all existing incremental solutions were failing, and they realized with absolute certainty that if they didn't build the correct architecture, The world was going to remain permanently suboptimal.
That distinction changes everything about how we view the genesis of a monopoly. The company itself is merely the administrative vessel required to bring a mandatory solution into the world.
Right.
If you start with the desire to be a founder for the status and then go searching the market for an idea to justify that desire, you're statistically guaranteed to fail.
Why is that a guarantee?
Because when you hit the inevitable moment of crisis, when your primary investor pulls out or a key engineer quits, you won't have the deep, irrational passion required to survive.
You'll just walk away.
You will simply quit because the pain outweighs the desire for status. You have to be dragged into entrepreneurship by the sheer gravitational pull of the idea itself.
Okay, so let's assume you have that idea. It's beating its way out of your chest. This brings us to the mechanics of survival in the market.
The fun part.
Right. Sam Altman introduces a doctrine here that is deeply counterintuitive to how we traditionally understand corporate power. He claims that startups, despite their high failure rate, operate on a surprisingly even playing field against massive corporate incumbents.
He does, and it fundamentally challenges traditional economic assumptions. In a normal corporate environment, being young, underfunded, and entirely unknown is a massive, often insurmountable disadvantage.
Sure.
But in the hyper-growth startup ecosystem, Altman argues that those exact traits are actually your greatest asymmetric assets.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that. It reminds me of guerrilla warfare.
That's a great analogy.
A massive incumbent corporation like a legacy tech giant is a heavy, slow-moving army. They have vast resources, but they also have massive supply lines to protect. How exactly does being poor and unknown give the guerrilla fighter an edge over that army?
It comes down to the concept of reputational surface area and the innovator's dilemma. A massive, publicly traded tech company has a multi-billion-dollar brand to protect.
Right.
Their executives are compensated based on quarterly earnings and avoiding PR disasters. Therefore, they cannot launch a flawed, experimental version 1 of a product. They cannot pivot their business model wildly over a weekend.
No, Wall Street would panic.
They cannot risk looking foolish to Wall Street.
Yeah.
Every decision must pass through layers of legal, compliance, and marketing review.
So their size effectively paralyzes them.
Exactly. But a young, unknown founder has zero reputational surface area to protect. You have nothing to lose, which forces a brutal scrappiness.
Yeah.
It forces you to rely entirely on the pure, functional merit of the product, rather than the polished veneer of a corporate brand. If your product is ugly but solves a critical problem, users will still use it. Being unknown allows you to take massive existential risks that a rational, established corporate board would instantly veto.
And that leads right into a critical warning from Altman about what he calls derivative companies. We see this constantly in the venture capital world.
All the time.
A founder looks at a wildly successful platform and says, we're going to build a beautifully designed version of X, or we're going to build Y, but specifically for red wine lovers. It's taking an existing model and applying a minor cosmetic tweak.
And those companies almost universally fail.
Really? Universally?
Yes, and the reason they fail is fascinating, because it isn't necessarily that the market for Y for red wine lovers doesn't exist. It might. The reason they fail goes back to the initial mathematical equation. You need an extraordinary team.
Right.
A derivative, incremental idea, fundamentally, cannot compel the extreme dedication required from elite engineers and operators.
Because elite talent wants to solve impossible problems.
Exactly. You cannot recruit the top 1% of global engineering talent to leave their comfortable, highly paid corporate jobs to work 100-hour weeks on a minor cosmetic tweak to an existing product.
They'd be bored.
Brilliant minds are attracted to fundamental, foundational challenges. A derivative idea signals to the market that the founder lacks true ambition, and that lack of ambition acts as a powerful repellent to the exact elite talent you need to survive.
I want to push back on this idea of ambition, though, because it leads to what I think is the most vital yet difficult concept in the entire source material.
Okay.
The unpopular but right paradox. The theory is that if an idea sounds amazing and obvious to everyone right out of the gate, Google or Apple would already be doing it, or 50 well-funded teams would already be building it.
Right.
You are supposed to look for the narrow intersection of an idea that sounds crazy or even like a bad idea to the general public, but is fundamentally correct. But how do you mathematically or practically differentiate between an idea that sounds bad because it is bad and an idea that sounds bad because it's a hidden genius monopoly?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question.
Yeah.
To answer it, we have to look deeply at market dynamics and what Altman calls the up elevator.
The up elevator.
Yeah, this is where institutional investors consistently make their greatest systemic error. When an idea is truly in that unpopular but right quadrant, the current addressable market for it often looks incredibly small, perhaps even practically non-existent.
So it looks like a terrible bet on paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Traditional investors look at the market size today and pass on the investment because the math doesn't make sense.
But the current size of the market is completely irrelevant to the outcome.
Completely irrelevant. What actually dictates the survival and scale of the startup is the 10-year evolutionary growth rate of that specific market.
So you are projecting.
You are not looking for a massive market today. You are looking for a small, highly concentrated market that is on the verge of expanding exponentially due to an unavoidable macroeconomic or technological shift.
This is the up elevator concept. You need a macro tailwind pushing your tiny market into a global market. Altman quotes Mark Andreessen's famous thesis, "Software is eating the world."
That was a huge one.
That was a massive decade-long tailwind. But let's ground this in a historical example so the mechanics are clear. Think about the transition from desktop internet to mobile in the late 2000s.
Okay.
If you built a mobile-first ride-sharing app in 2005, you failed because the GPS and cellular infrastructure wasn't there.
Right.
If you built it in 2009, right as smartphone adoption hit the vertical part of the S-curve, you rode the up elevator. You didn't have to convince people to use mobile phones. The macro shift was doing the heavy lifting for you. You just had to execute the service on top of that wave.
Which brings us to the ultimate intellectual filter used by Sequoia Capital, one of the most ruthless and successful venture firms in history.
What do they look for?
Before they look at your financial projections or your marketing plan, they ask a shockingly simple, devastating question. Why now?
Why is this the exact perfect millisecond in human history for this specific company to exist?
Yes. It is a test of the founder's situational awareness. Why could this have been built 2 years ago? What technological limitation, regulatory barrier, or cultural norm prevented it?
And equally important, why will it be too late 2 years from now?
Exactly. If you cannot answer that question with highly specific shifts, like a sudden drop in the cost of cloud computing, or a new piece of legislation, or a fundamental change in consumer behavior, your idea is likely either technologically impossible or already obsolete. You must be riding a wave that is just beginning to crest.
Okay, so let's assume you have navigated this minefield. You have the obsession, you understand the macro tailwinds, and you have perfectly timed the why now question.
You're in a good spot.
Now you actually have to build the thing. The mandate from the sources here is absolute, and it sounds deceptively simple. You must build something users love.
Altman is entirely uncompromising on this point. In the early stages of a startup, until you have a phenomenal product that users genuinely love, absolutely nothing else matters.
Nothing else.
Nothing. Hiring PR firms, attending networking conferences, trying to secure business development partnerships, it is all a toxic distraction.
It's just noise.
It creates an illusion of forward momentum while the core engine is stalling. The only action that matters is sitting in front of a monitor, writing code, and speaking directly to your users.
And here is where we get into the complex geometry of love versus like. Altman explains this using a concept he calls the law of conservation of happiness.
This is a brilliant framework.
When you launch a version 1 product, you essentially have a limited, finite amount of happiness or value to distribute into the market. You don't have the resources to build a massive, feature-rich platform. You only have a small amount of utility to offer.
This forces the founder into a fundamental strategic choice. You can take that limited amount of happiness and spread it very thinly over a massive, broad demographic of people.
Okay.
This puts you in what Altman calls the gray area. You have a large number of users who like your product a little bit. It's fine. It's okay.
But they don't love it.
Right. Or, conversely, you can take all of that finite happiness and concentrate it intensely onto a very small, specific group of people. This is the orange area.
The orange area.
You have a tiny number of users who absolutely love your product deeply and literally cannot imagine their daily lives without it.
Okay, I have to aggressively push back on this strategy.
Go for it.
Everything we are taught in the modern digital economy, and frankly, everything that venture capitalists demand in their board meetings, is about immediate scale. Total addressable market. Get big fast. Acquire millions of users before the competition clones you.
Yes, that is the prevailing wisdom.
If you deliberately concentrate your product on a tiny niche, say 10,000 highly specific users, aren't you just building a boutique lifestyle business? How do you ever reach the monopolistic scale required to survive? Why deliberately stay small?
You stay small initially because of the fundamental physics of growth. It is mathematically and psychologically exponentially easier to scale a business from a small foundation of intense love than it is to attempt to convert a massive apathetic audience into a passionate one. Think about the mechanics of user acquisition. If 1 million people only like your product a little bit, they have zero loyalty. The exact moment a competitor launches a slightly better or slightly cheaper alternative, your massive user base will churn instantly.
Because they never really cared that much anyway.
Furthermore, users who only like a product do not talk about it.
Yeah.
They don't post about it. They don't defend it. You have to pay for every single new user through expensive advertising.
So you are constantly burning cash just to maintain a disengaged audience.
Exactly. But if a small group of 10,000 people loves your product, the mechanics flip. They become your organic evangelists.
They do your marketing for you.
They force their friends to use it. They force their coworkers to adopt it. Breakout, monopolistic companies grow organically through word of mouth because the product is undeniably, objectively excellent for that core group.
It's using simplicity as an offensive weapon. You start with a minimal surface area. If we look at the historical precedents, the initial versions of the biggest digital empires today were comically simple.
They were.
The very first iteration of Facebook was essentially a basic directory with a few text fields restricted solely to Harvard students. It didn't have a newsfeed, algorithms, or advertising. It solved one social problem perfectly for a few thousand people.
Same with Google.
Right. The first version of Google was an objectively ugly web page with a single text box and 2 buttons. They didn't try to build a weather portal, a news aggregator, and an email service simultaneously. They focused all their happiness on returning a faster search result than Yahoo.
And this highlights a fatal trap that destroys well-funded startups. Building a growth machine before achieving true product-market fit.
Which happens constantly.
Founders are inherently anxious. They have investors demanding traction, so they want to see the analytics charts go up and to the right. To force that metric, they implement aggressive growth hacks, they buy massive ad campaigns, and they optimize their conversion funnels to trick users into signing up.
Altman sternly warns against this. Why is premature growth hacking so fatal?
Because it is the equivalent of pouring water into a bucket with a massive hole in its base.
That's a great visual.
If you use marketing capital to pump thousands of users into a product they don't genuinely love, they will try it once, realize it's mediocre, and they will churn out immediately.
And then what?
Not only have you burned your precious financial runway, but you have permanently burned your reputation with those users. They will never come back, even if you fix the product later. You must fix the hole in the bucket first. You must achieve product-market fit, that intense love from a small group, before you pour a single dollar into the growth engine.
Which brings us to a critical operational question. How do you actually know if you've fixed the hole in the bucket? How do you mathematically and intuitively know if your users love the product?
There's only one way.
The only way is to establish an absolute, unbreakable feedback loop directly between the founder and the user.
And this is where we see a common lethal mistake, particularly prevalent in elite, highly funded circles like Stanford startups.
What do they do wrong?
As soon as these founders raise their first round of seed funding, their very first instinct is to hire sales representatives and customer support staff.
They want to delegate the messy stuff.
Right. They want to abstract themselves away from the grinding, unglamorous reality of dealing with angry users. They want to focus on high-level strategy.
But the sources are militant about this. Founders must put absolutely no one between themselves and the user. 0 layers of management. Why?
Because direct communication embeds the feedback loop directly into the DNA of the company's ultimate decision makers. Imagine the mechanics of it.
Okay.
If a customer service representative gets an angry email about a broken feature, they log it in a ticketing system. To the CEO, that broken feature is just a statistic on a monthly report. It lacks urgency.
It's just a data point.
But if the founder, the person who actually wrote the code, is the one answering that furious email from a frustrated user at 2:07 a.m. on a Sunday, they feel the psychological pain of that failure personally.
The pain isn't abstracted, it's visceral.
Precisely. And when the founder feels the pain personally, the product gets fixed the next morning. If you delegate customer support, you lose the pulse of the market, and your product iteration cycle slows down to a fatal crawl.
And speaking of statistics and reports, this deep dive requires us to look at the absolute ruthlessness of honesty in metrics. The data will tell you if the bucket is leaking, but only if you look at the right data.
Which many don't.
The expert here breaks down a critical psychological flaw in human management, the behavioral law that a company will inevitably build whatever the CEO decides to measure.
It is an unavoidable law of organizational behavior. Human beings optimize for the metrics they are judged against.
Naturally.
If a CEO measures and celebrates what we call vanity metrics, like total registered accounts or gross page views or app downloads, the engineering and marketing teams will ruthlessly optimize for those numbers.
Even if it hurts the product.
They will run misleading ads to drive clicks, and the registrations will skyrocket. The CEO will look at the dashboard, see the line going up, and assume they are winning. But those users might log in once and never return.
So what are the metrics that actually matter? What are the survival metrics?
To survive, you must ruthlessly focus on metrics that measure genuine engagement and retention. You look at cohort retention.
Meaning?
Of the 100 people who signed up in January, how many are still actively logging into the platform in June? You look at daily active users divided by monthly active users to measure habit formation.
To see if it's a daily habit.
You look at Net Promoter Scores, or NPS, which essentially asks users on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely they are to recommend the product to a colleague. If your cohort retention is flatlining, it doesn't matter if you have 1 million downloads. You have a failing product.
You can't outmarket bad retention.
You have to be brutally honest with yourself when those core survival numbers aren't moving. You cannot lie to the data because the market will eventually reconcile the truth.
Okay, let's pivot to the final and perhaps most sobering reality check of this entire deep dive.
The math.
We need to look at Dustin Moscovitz's financial math regarding risk and reward. We've established the physiological stress, the brutally narrow path to finding a correct idea, the agonizing product iteration cycle, and the constant threat of failure.
All the fun stuff.
If your ultimate pragmatic goal in life is simply to acquire a massive amount of wealth and have a significant impact on global infrastructure, is founding a startup actually the most logical path?
Mathematically, for the vast majority of highly intelligent operators, the answer is definitively no.
Really?
No. Moskovitz dissects what he calls the slice of the pie math. It's a risk-adjusted wealth calculation that completely dismantles the traditional narrative that the only way to get rich is to be the founder and CEO.
Walk us through the mechanics of that math, because human ego naturally tells you that owning 100% of your own company is the only path to real generational wealth.
The ego lies because it ignores the mechanics of venture capital dilution and the probability of failure. Let's assume you want a financial outcome that justifies the immense physiological stress we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Scenario A. You start your own company. Initially, you own a large share, but over multiple rounds of venture funding, your equity is diluted.
Right. Investors take their cut.
If you are highly successful, you might own 10% of the company at the time of an exit. But statistically, the probability of that company being worth zero is overwhelmingly high, well over 90%.
So you have a 10% chance of anything happening at all.
Even if you manage to build a company valued at $100 million, which is a miraculous, incredibly difficult feat, your 10% share is worth $10 million.
Which sounds like a fantastic outcome until you mathematically compare it to the alternative path.
Right. Let's look at scenario B. Compare that $10 million expected value to the outcome of being, say, the 100th engineer at a hyper-growth, later-stage company that has already established product-market fit.
So not the founder, just an early employee.
Think of joining Facebook in 2009, or Stripe in 2014, or OpenAI in 2020.
As an employee, you might only get a fraction of a single % of equity. It feels incredibly small compared to being a founder.
It feels small, but the risk probability profile is entirely different. The probability of that later stage company reaching a massive monopolistic valuation, say $10 billion or $100 billion, is significantly higher because the existential risk of finding product market fit has already been solved by the founders.
Oh, I see. The hardest part is over.
Your fraction of a percent at a $100 billion valuation yields an exponentially larger financial return than your 10% at a $100 million valuation. Plus, you receive a high base salary, you have weekends off, and your physical health remains intact.
So the risk-adjusted financial return of being a relatively early employee at a guaranteed winner is vastly superior to the expected value of holding a large equity stake in a company that is statistically destined to fail.
It is mathematically undeniable.
And realistically, your actual impact on the world is arguably larger because you are applying your engineering or operational skills to a platform that already commands massive global distribution.
Exactly. So what does this all mean when we extrapolate this math to the bigger picture of global talent allocation? If the world's brightest engineering and business minds sat down and truly internalized this risk-adjusted math, the threshold for starting a new company would be vastly higher.
It acts as the ultimate filter. If human beings acted purely as rational agents maximizing their economic return against their physiological risk, almost no one would start a company.
None of the rational ones, anyway.
The only people left starting companies would be those who literally cannot sleep at night because their specific idea is beating its way out of their chest. It mathematically filters out everyone doing it for the glamour, the money, the schedule, or the vanity title of CEO. It leaves only the obsessed.
Which is exactly how the ecosystem functions at its highest level. The market requires that irrational obsession to overcome the massive friction of building something from nothing.
It is an intense, unyielding journey we've gone on today in this deep dive. We set out to autopsy the reality of high-stakes capitalism, and the truths we extracted from Altman and Moskowitz are profoundly unromantic.
Highly unromantic.
The hyper-growth startup ecosystem is not a glamorous playground for the intellectual elite. It is a brutal, exhausting crucible. It requires an idea whose time has perfectly arrived, macro tailwinds that you barely understand, let alone control, a product that a tiny, concentrated group of people obsess over to the point of evangelism.
And a founder willing to endure intense physical and psychological strain while managing the livelihoods of their team and the demands of their investors.
And this is where we must return to the terrifying variable introduced in our cold open. Because here is the ultimate humbling truth of this entire deep dive. You can execute perfectly on every single one of those elements.
You can do it all right.
You can manage your psychology flawlessly. You can identify the perfect macro up elevator. You can build a flawless product that users love. And you can recruit the absolute top 1% of global talent.
But the outcome is still subject to the equation. Idea times product times execution times team times luck.
Luck remains a multiplier from 0 to 10,000. You can do absolutely everything right, but a sudden shift in global interest rates, a new piece of international regulation, a global pandemic, or a competitor across the world launching an identical product a week earlier.
Any of that can drop your luck multiplier to 0. You are wiped out.
Just gone.
Alternatively, you can make several strategic mistakes. You can build a slightly flawed product. But if you happen to catch a massive cultural wave at the exact perfect millisecond in history, your luck multiplier hits 10,000, catapulting you into the absolute stratosphere of global wealth and influence.
Which leaves us with a haunting question for you, the listener, to consider as you look at the architecture of our modern world.
It's a big question.
If the ultimate outcome of a startup empire relies on a random multiplier that can reach up to 10,000, well, to what extent are the legendary titans of industry we idolize today simply average, competent executors who happen to pull a winning lottery ticket at the dawn of the digital age?
And if that is mathematically true, if a massive portion of extreme economic success is dictated by an entirely uncontrollable variable, how should that permanently alter the way we assign genius, distribute power, and respect authority in our modern global economy?